I do want to follow up here where we left off earlier in this morning's Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing. And I did hear your exchange with Senator Murray, where you indicated that in the middle of a conflict, it would be difficult to reach any final conclusions about whether or not U.S. weapons were used in violation of international humanitarian law. I would just point out that there are many other conflicts where we are able to quickly make and do issue those kinds of judgments. But what I don't think is complicated at all is if you look at the period of time from October 7th, the terrible Hamas October 7th attacks, to the present. I don't think it's complicated to conclude that the Netanyahu government has complied with international norms with respect to the delivery of humanitarian assistance along that continuum of time. Is it your testimony today that the Netanyahu government has complied with international norms when it comes to delivering humanitarian assistance to desperate people in Gaza since October 7th till today? I think there's been a huge gap between stated intent and actual results. And that's a gap that we've been trying to close every single day. And I think that's what we've been seeing for many months, Mr. Secretary. I get that. Obviously, my question was whether or not there's been a violation of international norms, which I think to any person with eyes to see and ears to hear, there have been. And as you know, there are many people in the U.S. government who have reached similar conclusions. And actually, it's been well reported on. So I think that does hurt our credibility when we're not able to make that clear call. Let me move on to the issue where we were in agreement. I think this morning, what we just saw in that exchange between Senator Van Hollen and Secretary Blinken was a rare moment of accountability in Washington's handling of the Israel-Gaza crisis. Van Hollen didn't hold back. He pressed Blinken hard on whether Israel has adhered to international norms in delivering humanitarian aid since October 7th. And let's be clear, this wasn't some abstract policy debate. This was about real people in Gaza, families without food, water, or medical supplies, caught in the crossfire of a conflict with no end in sight. Van Hollen cut through the political noise and demanded clarity. Has Netanyahu's government upheld its obligations under international law, or has it crossed a line? And while Blinken tried to sidestep with diplomatic caution, the pressure was clear. The message: if the U.S. is going to be a credible voice for peace, it can't turn a blind eye when an ally violates the very standards it claims to uphold, which is that it's in our national security interest to have a durable end to the conflict in Gaza and to the larger Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and that we can only achieve security, self-determination, dignity, and justice for Israelis and Palestinians alike by securing a normalization of relations with Israel and Saudi Arabia and other states, as well as a clear plan, I think you said time-bound plan, to establish a Palestinian state. Am I paraphrasing that fairly? That's correct. And you agree that it's not possible to achieve a secure and just end to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict by jumping over the equities of the Palestinian people. Is that right? Absolutely not. That's impossible. It would be self-defeating. I want to emphasize that point because, you know, Mr. Secretary, you've been around Washington for a long time because it has been fashionable in some foreign policy circles to believe that you could do that, that you could somehow achieve peace and stability and security by jumping over the Palestinian issue. So, and I want to emphasize this because you have said that the Saudis are insistent on a clear path to a Palestinian state and a time-bound path. But it's also in our national security interest. So, are we also insistent on that? Yes, we are. And again, it's interesting, and I think instructive to note, that perhaps the two most vicious and vociferous enemies of a two-state solution are Hamas and Iran. That should tell you something. And it also should tell you what a rebuke to both Hamas and Iran it would be if we could finally get on this pathway in a credible and time-bound way. And I think certainly everything we've heard from the Saudis in the context of having these normalization discussions makes it clear that they feel the same way. Let's get real. American credibility is on the line in the Middle East, and right now, it's taking serious hits. When the U.S. can't bring itself to clearly and consistently call for adherence to international norms in delivering humanitarian aid to Gaza, it sends a dangerous message that our values are negotiable when it comes to certain allies. And that's not just a moral failure, it's a strategic one. Senators are making it clear that peace in the region isn't some vague ideal. It's a national security imperative. A durable resolution demands more than short-term ceasefires or behind-the-scenes diplomacy. It requires normalization of relations with Israel and, critically, a concrete, time-bound path toward a Palestinian state. That's not just a Palestinian demand, it's Saudi Arabia's red line. And increasingly, it's being recognized as a foundational step toward lasting peace. Without a roadmap, we're stuck in a cycle of violence, outrage, and political inertia while American influence fades. Well, I'm glad you raised that, because there is one other party, right? In addition to the two that you mentioned, that has been dead set against a Palestinian state and a two-state solution. In December of 2022, just the day before the new Netanyahu government was sworn in, Netanyahu issued a list of priorities for this new very extreme government. And I'm quoting one of his guiding principles was, "The Jewish people have an exclusive and inalienable right to all parts of the land of Israel," meaning including all the West Bank. So, I want to read to you something else that Prime Minister Netanyahu said back in 2019 at a Likud meeting. And this has been well reported, and I quote, "Anyone who wants to prevent the creation of a Palestinian state needs to support strengthening Hamas. This is part of our strategy to divide the Palestinians between those in Gaza and those in Judea and Samaria." End quote. So, Mr. Secretary, you mentioned some of the other opponents of a two-state solution, and it's absolutely true that Hamas believes in one state, right? Their despicable endgame is one state where they wipe out the state of Israel, right? And so, can you be really clear as to why Prime Minister Netanyahu is simply misrepresenting the case when he says that a Palestinian state and a two-state solution would be a reward for Hamas? Isn't it exactly the opposite? I believe it's exactly the opposite. Now, of course, a Palestinian state has to come with the necessary security guarantees for Israel. Senator Van Hollen just put a spotlight on one of the most uncomfortable questions in U.S. foreign policy. What exactly is Netanyahu's endgame in Gaza? In a tense exchange with Secretary Blinken, Van Hollen floated a provocative theory that Netanyahu might actually be empowering Hamas, intentionally or not, as a way to sabotage any serious movement toward a Palestinian state. And let's be honest, it's a question that needs to be asked. Because after months of relentless military operations and humanitarian catastrophe, the idea that weakening Hamas is the sole objective no longer adds up. What if the chaos is the point? What if maintaining Hamas as a perpetual threat gives Netanyahu the political cover he needs to block statehood while claiming there's no partner for peace? That's not just cynical, it's dangerously short-sighted. Van Hollen's line of questioning forces the Biden administration to confront whether it's enabling a strategy that undercuts the very two-state solution it claims to support. No one wants to see a state emerge that would become a threat to Israel, and I think there are effective ways to make sure that that doesn't happen. But yes, to your point again, I think the biggest rebuke to Hamas and to Iran would be the realization of a Palestinian state alongside a Jewish and democratic Israel. And I agree with you 100%, Mr. Secretary. I just want us to be clear-eyed about all the forces that are arrayed against us. Part of the effort to undermine the PA, or the two-state solution, has been undermining the Palestinian Authority. As you know, Finance Minister Smotrich has been withholding funds for the PA, which is weakening the PA and creating an even more unstable security situation on the West Bank. Today, Ben Gvir talked about reoccupying Gaza. He said he'd like to live in Gaza. This is today, reported. So my question, Mr. Secretary, is, what are we willing to do when people like Finance Minister Smotrich hold up funds for the PA, weakening security? And at what point do we say that our continued support is contingent on more cooperation? I think if you ask the Israeli security forces, whether it's the intelligence forces, Shin Bet, whether it's the IDF, they will tell you that the PA plays an absolutely critical